Most people know about the Chevrolet Corvair as the small rear-engine car that Ralph Nader famously called unsafe. But there is a much stranger, much rarer story hiding behind the Corvair's reputation. In 1966, one man tried to turn the Corvair into something completely different, a high-performance American sports car that could compete with the likes of Porsche. That man was John Fitch, and his creation was called the Fitch Phoenix. John Fitch was not just any car guy. He was a racing driver, an engineer, and a World War II fighter pilot. He raced at places like Le Mans and worked with companies like Mercedes-Benz and Chevrolet. He also cared deeply about car safety, inventing highway safety barriers and energy-absorbing crash equipment. But in the mid-1960s, Fitch turned his attention to building a sports car of his own. He didn't start from scratch. Instead, he used a platform he already knew well, the Chevrolet Corvair. Before the Phoenix, Fitch had already modified the Corvair to create a car called the Fitch Sprint. It had upgraded suspension, better handling, and a few styling tweaks, but Fitch wanted more than just a tuned-up Corvair. He wanted a full redesign, a proper grand touring car that was fast, stylish, and uniquely American. So he began building the Phoenix, and it would become one of the most unusual one-off sports cars ever made. The Fitch Phoenix started life as a 1966 Chevrolet Corvair, but Fitch had big changes in mind. First, he shortened the Corvair's original 108-inch wheelbase down to 95 inches. This made the car more compact and gave it sharper handling. The chassis was still Corvair underneath, but the body was something entirely new. Fitch sent the steel bodywork design to Intermeccanica, an Italian coach builder based in Turin. The result was a sleek, low-slung coupe with a Targa-style roof and some very strange features. One of the oddest things about the Fitch Phoenix was where the spare tires were stored. Because the car had wide front fenders and needed space for the cooling system, Fitch tucked a spare tire into each front fender. It looked unusual, but it worked. The body was hand-built in Italy and sent back to the United States, where Fitch completed the assembly. Under the rear deck sat a 2.7-liter flat-six engine, air-cooled like the standard Corvair motor. But this version was tuned to produce 170 horsepower at 5,200 revolutions per minute and 212 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 revolutions per minute. That might not sound like much today, but in the 1960s it was solid performance. The Phoenix could go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in 7.5 seconds and had a top speed of around 130 miles per hour. The car also had upgraded suspension with independent control on all four wheels. In the front, Girling disc brakes provided solid stopping power, while the rear used the standard Corvair drum brakes. Fitch gave it a strong chassis and some smart touches like door-mounted warning lights and a built-in roll bar. The inside was clean and driver-focused with the kind of simplicity you would expect from someone who actually raced cars. Fitch was not interested in luxury or showing off. He wanted a car that worked well on back roads and highways and looked different from everything else. Fitch had plans to build more cars and even took deposits from a few interested buyers. But then, the government stepped in. In 1967, new federal safety rules were introduced, and at the same time, Chevrolet was getting ready to kill off the Corvair. Without a base model to build from and facing expensive crash testing requirements, Fitch had no choice but to cancel the project. Only one Fitch Phoenix was ever built. It stayed with John Fitch for the rest of his life. After he passed away in 2012, the car went up for auction in 2014 and sold for $253,000. That one car, built in a garage with parts from Italy and a dream of beating Porsche, remains a forgotten footnote in American car history. But it is a reminder of what one man with a lot of skill and a little stubbornness can do with the right idea. Most people have never heard of Appal. It was not a big name like Volkswagen or Porsche. It was a small company based in Belgium, and for a few short years in the early 1960s, it made one of the most unusual and interesting little sports cars in Europe. This is the story of the Appal 1200 Coupe, a fiberglass-bodied car that looked Italian, ran on German parts, and quietly disappeared after only about 150 were made. But even today, if you manage to find one, it will stop you in your tracks. It is light, small, oddly stylish, and completely unexpected. The Appal 1200 Coupe was born out of one man's obsession with fiberglass. His name was Edmund Peary, and he founded the company Appal, short for Application Polyester Arme de Liege, in 1961. The company was based in Liege, Belgium, and Peary's main goal was to make lightweight cars using fiberglass, which was a pretty new thing back then. Fiberglass was strong, light, and it did not rust like steel. Peary thought this was the perfect material to build car bodies, especially for small, sporty cars. In 1962, Appal brought the 1200 Coupe to the Brussels Auto Salon, a major car show in Belgium. The design of the car was inspired by sleek Italian Berlinettas of the time, and it looked a lot like the Porsche 356 Carrera Abarth, especially with its rounded body and curved roofline. But under that curvy shell, the car was actually based on the Volkswagen Beetle. That meant it used a VW chassis and a 1.2-liter flat-4 engine mounted at the rear, just like the Beetle. The engine was nothing fancy. It was a 1.2-liter air-cooled flat-4 engine that made about 40 horsepower. That might not sound like much, and honestly, it was not. But because the Appal 1200 Coupe only weighed around 1,496 pounds, it did not need a lot of power to get moving. The car could reach a top speed of about 80 miles per hour, which was decent for a small coupe in the early 1960s. The engine sent power to the rear wheels through a 4-speed manual transmission, just like in the Beetle. What really made the car different was the fiberglass body. It was designed with a sloped nose, a long hood, and a rounded rear end with a split bumper. The windshield was one big curved piece of glass, and the whole thing looked like it belonged in a different class than a regular Beetle. Cooling air entered through side intakes and exited through a grille at the back. Inside, the cabin was basic but neat. This was not a luxury car. It was a lightweight, efficient machine that focused on simple engineering and unique looks. From 1961 to 1965, Appal built about 150 units of the 1200 Coupe. That is not a lot. Most of them stayed in Belgium, France, and a few other European countries. Today, only a few dozen are known to still exist, and they have become rare collector's items. Some have been restored, others are still waiting in barns or garages for someone to bring them back to life. What happened to Appal after the 1200 Coupe? The company kept making fiberglass vehicles, including dune buggies and replicas of Porsche models, but it never made another car like the 1200 Coupe again. Edmund Peary eventually moved on, and Appal faded into history by the end of the 1990s. The Appal 1200 Coupe is a strange mix of different ideas. It is a Belgian car, built with German parts that looked Italian. It was not fast, but it was light and cleverly made. It did not win races, but it stood out. And in the world of forgotten cars, that is sometimes enough to earn a place in history. Most people have never seen one. Fewer have ever heard of it. And yet, back in 1964, a car called the Elva GT160 quietly appeared, blending British racing ideas with Italian design flair. It was low, fast, and shaped like something from the future. But instead of becoming the next big thing, it disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. And what happened behind the scenes is where things get strange, expensive, and even a little funny. The Elva GT160 was built by Elva Cars, a British company known for making lightweight race cars. Elva had already gained attention with the Elva 7S, a fast, open-top race car that performed well on the track. Wanting something more road-friendly but still sporty, they decided to build a coupe. This new car would be sleek, mid-engined, and use serious racing technology, but Elva was not interested in doing it all alone. They partnered with Carrozzeria Fazor, an Italian coach builder located in Savigliano, Italy. The job of designing the body was given to Trevor Fiore, also known as Trevor Frost. He was a British designer working in Italy at the time. His design for the GT160 was sharp and clean. The car sat just 40 inches tall and had smooth lines with hidden headlights and big air scoops in front of the rear wheels. It looked more like a concept car than something for the road. Under the aluminum body was a mid-mounted 2.0-liter inline-4 engine from BMW. It was a 1,991 cubic centimeter unit with dry sump lubrication, putting out about 182 horsepower at 7,200 revolutions per minute and 156 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 revolutions per minute. This power went through a 5-speed Hewland manual gearbox often used in race cars. The car used a tubular space frame chassis, which helped keep weight down to just around 1,232 pounds. The front suspension used unequal length wishbones with Armstrong adjustable coil springs and dampers, and the rear was a similar setup but with added trailing arms. The brakes were 10-inch Girling discs all around. It had a wheelbase of 91.3 inches, a length of 150 inches, and a width of 60 inches. The target top speed was around 160 miles per hour, which gave the car its name, GT160. Elva had big hopes. The GT160 was shown to the public at the 1964 Turin Motor Show. People noticed the design, but few knew how tricky the project was becoming behind the scenes. Building a lightweight race car was one thing. Building a mid-engine road coupe with custom aluminum bodywork from Italy was something else. The cost of production was much higher than expected. Elva simply could not afford to put it into full production. Only 3 prototypes of the Elva GT160 were built. The first one, Chassis 1, appeared in Turin and was later restored in 1994 by Roger Dunbar, who ran Elva Racing Components. The second chassis was not finished at first. Later, it ended up in the United States, where someone swapped the BMW engine for a Buick 215 V8. That car was raced in local events. The third chassis was the only one that stayed exactly as it was meant to be, with its BMW engine and original bodywork. In 1965, one of the prototypes was entered in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was driven by Tony Lanfranchi and Richard Wriothesley. The car had speed, but its time on the track did not last. It dropped out early because of mechanical problems. It was a short and disappointing race, but still a bold move for a car that was barely out of the prototype stage. That same year, Elva was taken over by Trojan Limited, a company already building Elva's race cars under license. With new management and shifting goals, the GT160 project was left behind. Today, the Elva GT160 is almost forgotten, but for a moment it was a bold idea. British racing tech mixed with Italian coachwork, aiming for the road and the track. It promised a lot, delivered a little, and left behind a story that is equal parts ambition and reality check. In the mid-1960s, a strange-looking sports car started showing up on the streets of Sao Paulo, Brazil. It did not come from Italy, Germany, or America. It came from a Brazilian company that had never made a car like this before. Most people had never heard of it. Even today, it still confuses car fans outside of Brazil. This car was called the Brasinka Uirapuru, also known as the Brasinka 4200 GT. It looked sleek, it sounded serious, and it had a name that no one could quite pronounce correctly on the first try. The story begins with a company called Brasinka SA, based in São Caetano do Sul, a city in the state of São Paulo, Brazil. Brasinka had been around since 1949 and was first called INCA, which stood for Indústria Nacional de Carrocerias de Aço. The company originally made steel bodies for buses and trucks, not sports cars. But by the early 1960s, they wanted to show the world that they could do more than just build big metal boxes on wheels. So they decided to make a grand touring car, something fast, stylish, and fully built in Brazil. To make this happen, Brasinka brought in Rigoberto Soler Gisbert, a Spanish engineer who had already worked with car companies like Fábrica Nacional de Motores, DKW Vemag, and Willis Overland do Brasil. Soler had a bold idea: build a full-size Grand Tourer with a steel body and lots of power under the hood. This was unusual because, at the time, most small companies used fiberglass since it was cheaper and easier to shape. But Soler and Brasinka insisted on using real steel panels, even though it made the car heavier and more expensive to produce. The result was the Brasinka 4200 GT, named after its engine size. It used a 4.3-liter comma, or 4,271 cubic centimeters, Chevrolet inline-6 engine. This engine came from General Motors trucks, but was upgraded with 3 SU carburetors and some tweaks to give it more power. The base version made 155 horsepower, while later versions made 163 horsepower in the 4200S and up to 170 horsepower in the 4200 GTS. There were also options for either a 3-speed or 4-speed manual transmission, and all models used a front-engine rear-wheel drive layout. The car was fast for its time. It could go from 0 to 62 miles per hour in around 10.4 seconds and had a top speed of over 124 miles per hour. It weighed about 1,984 pounds, which is not light, but also not too heavy for a steel-bodied Grand Tourer. One thing that made the Uirapuru stand out was its aerodynamics. It was one of the first Brazilian cars to be tested in a wind tunnel at the Aeronautical Technological Institute in São José dos Campos. This helped improve how the car handled at higher speeds. From 1964 to 1966, only 77 cars were made, including 3 convertibles. Most of them were coupes. There were also several versions: the basic 4200 GT, the more powerful 4200S, and the top-tier 4200 GTS. There was even a wild prototype called the Gavião, which was a station wagon built for the Brazilian highway police. It had armor plating, police radios, a stretcher, firefighting tools, and even machine guns hidden in the headlights. Yes, seriously. Only one Gavião was built, and it stayed a prototype. In 1966, Brasinka stopped building the Uirapuru. It cost too much to make, and not enough people were buying it. But the story did not end there. Rigoberto Soler, along with Walter Hahn Jr., created a new company called Sociedade Técnica de Veículos, or STV. They bought the remaining parts and rights to the Uirapuru and kept building a few more cars under the STV Uirapuru name until 1967. Today, the Brasinka Uirapuru is mostly remembered by car collectors and historians in Brazil. It never became a global success, but it did prove that Brazil could design and build a proper sports car from scratch. Strangely, the Uirapuru's design looked very similar to the Jensen Interceptor, a British sports car that started production shortly after. Some people say it was a coincidence, others are not so sure. Either way, the Uirapuru remains one of Brazil's boldest cars from the 1960s, built by a truck company, styled by a Spanish engineer, and powered by an American truck engine. It may not have sold in big numbers, but it left behind a strange and fascinating story, one that most people outside of Brazil still have not heard, and yes, it is still hard to pronounce. It is Uirapuru. Try saying that 3 times fast. In the early 1960s, Poland had a dream. While most of the world was moving forward with sleek sedans and futuristic ideas, Fabryka Samochodowo-Subowiec, also known as FSO, wanted to catch up. Their old car, the FSO Warzawa, was based on a Soviet model from the 1940s called the Gazem 20 Pobeda. It was heavy, slow, and very outdated. So in 1961, engineers in Warsaw got to work on something new. Something that could show Poland had car-building ideas of its own. They called it the FSO Warzawa 210, and it almost became something big. FSO was based in Warsaw, Poland, and had been around since 1950. In those early years, they were making copies of Soviet cars. But by 1964, the world was changing fast. In countries like West Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, cars were getting faster, lighter, and more stylish. People wanted more than just a basic machine that worked. They wanted comfort, better looks, and performance. The team at FSO knew the old Warzawa had no future. That is when they started building the prototype of the Warzawa 210. The Warzawa 210 looked different from the earlier model right away. Gone were the round headlights and old curves. Instead, the front of the 210 had a flat horizontal grille with 2 rectangular headlights on each side. It had a modern boxy shape, almost like something you might see in Italy or Germany in the 1960s. The body looked more professional, more serious, and less like a leftover from the 1940s. Under the hood, the prototype had a 2.5-liter inline 6-cylinder engine. This engine could produce around 82 horsepower. It was not a race car, but it was a big step forward for Polish cars at the time. The Warzawa 210 could reach a top speed of around 100 miles per hour, or 160 kilometers per hour. That was fast for a Polish sedan in 1964. It used a manual gearbox and had new front suspension using McPherson struts, something usually seen on more advanced European cars. The inside of the car was designed to fit 6 people. That made it good for family use or maybe even for taxi work. The cabin was roomy and simple, built for function more than style. But at least it did not feel like sitting inside a tank like the older Warzawa. Even with all that effort, the project never went forward. Around the same time, the Polish government was looking for a faster way to improve its car industry. They signed a deal with Fiat, the Italian company, to build a version of the Fiat 125 in Poland. That became the Polski Fiat 125P, and it pushed the Warzawa 210 off the table. Only prototypes were ever built. The FSO Warzawa 210 was forgotten by most people. Today, it is mostly seen in photos and car museums. It never got to become a real production car, but it showed that FSO was ready to think differently before politics chose a shortcut.